Hey guys, it's Angela again. Welcome to another episode on Swift Deep Dive. And in this deep dive, we're going to cover Swift switch statements. Now, if you were a train driver and you were pulling into a large station, say Paddington or King's Cross, and you had to manually check if every single platform was empty or if it was occupied, that would take you a long time. And that's kind of like trying to write an if-else statement for a whole bunch of conditions. What's way more efficient and much easier is if you could just ask the station manager which platform should I pull into, and they give you a number, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and you just go to that platform. So this is kind of like how switch statements work. We can have a variable. Say if we think about our egg timer, we have this variable called hardness, which of course depends on the button that the user presses on. And we can check to see what the value of that variable is equal to. If it's equal to soft, then we could print 5 or the soft time. If it's equal to medium, then print 7. It's hard, print 12. So essentially what's happening here is we're matching the value of this variable to each of these cases. And depending on which one matches, then we're going to perform different actions. And finally, at the end, there is a default statement in case none of our cases match the current value. So usually that's where you might print an error, where you might say none of the values match, or hey, you might want to check and see what's going on here. Or you could use it like an else statement, like a catch-all, do this in all other cases. Now, the reason why switch statements are so great is because not only do they reduce the amount of code you have to type instead of having to type if hardness is equal to soft, open brackets, close brackets, if hardness is equal to medium, etc. But underlying how a switch statement versus how an if and else statement works, if you have more than 5 cases, it's usually more efficient to use a switch statement because it performs a search rather than having to manually go through each of the conditions and check them. If you have less than 5 conditions, then it's often quicker and easier to write just some if statements. Now, what if you can't match the precise value of a variable? What if you wanted to match a range? Say if hardness was actually a number and we wanted to check if it was between, say, 3 and 5 and then 5 and 7, what would you do in that case? Well, here's where the Swift range operator comes in again. And we saw this already before. We saw that you could use 3 dots to create a closed range where you're creating a range between A and B. So for example, we could create a whole bunch of random numbers between 1 and 100, including 1 and 100. Then we would use the closed range. And then we have the half open range where we have a less than sign at the end. And this means that we have a range between A and B, but not including B. And finally, one that you haven't seen yet is something called a one-sided range operator, where you leave one of the sides, either the A side or the B side, empty. So this means that we're creating a range that is up to and including B, but it can be any number that's less than B. So bearing in mind what we've just learned, I want you to challenge yourself and play around with these range operators as well as the switch statement by changing our existing love calculator that you created using an if, else statement into one that uses a switch statement only. So have a think about what you need to do. Maybe rewind and take a look at the range operators if you need to, or Google for the range operator in the Swift programming language book and have a read over there. But essentially, the challenge is to simply adapt your love calculator that's using an if statement into one that uses a switch statement. So pause the video and try and give that a go. So here I've got the code from before where we're using our if, and else statements to check if each of these conditions are true and perform the correct actions. Now, in this case, we're going to change it to a switch statement. And again, I'm going to use the capability of Xcode to provide code snippets by just starting out with writing the keyword, which is of course switch, and I'm going to hit enter, and then it inserts a code snippet with these placeholders for me to replace. So in this case, the value that we're checking or we're switching on is of course our love score. So that goes there. And then the case or the pattern that we're matching is whether if love score is greater than 80. So in this case, I'm going to check to see if love score is between 80 and 100. And in that case, the code that should get executed is, of course, this line, printing, "You love each other like Kanye loves Kanye." Now, in order to add another case, I'm simply just going to write the word case, and then I'm going to provide the case pattern that I'm trying to match. So in this case, it's greater than 40. So I'm going to write between 40 ... and less than, so I'm using a half open range, to 80. So this means it's from 40 to basically 79, and this is from 80 to 100. So in this case, what we should do is to print "you go together like Coke and Mentos." And then finally, the last case I'm going to add is to check if it's between 0 and less than 40. So 0 to 39, so that we don't step on this case's shoes. And finally, we're going to print "You'll be forever alone." Now, the default statement should catch if love score was ever outside of this range. And because we're creating a random number here between 0 and 100, it's really unlikely that it's ever going to go outside of our 3 switch statements, because here we got 0 up to 39, and then here we've got from 80 to 100. So it should cover all the bases, and if it really doesn't, then we should print that there's an error and love score is out of range. So here we've created our switch statement, and it replaces our if and else statement. Now in this case, it might seem like we're actually writing a bit more code than before, but if you had a lot of cases, say 5 or 6 or 7 or more, then it would be a lot more efficient writing it like this. And your code will also run much faster than if you just had a whole bunch of conditions, which each need to be checked and confirmed. Instead, this case, we are pattern matching the value of this against one of these cases, and it's more performant when there are a lot more conditions. Now that you've learned all about switch statements, it's again time to head over to Replit and complete the exercise on switch.